The world ends before it begins. I can feel it in my bones, a vibration that crawls beneath the steel plating of the barracks, through the soot-choked air of the manufactorum, and rattles the vox grills of every sleeper in the Spartan dormitories. They call it the draft, though summons or condemnation might be more apartment. Today, the Emperor's gaze is heavy upon me, and though I will not see him, I can feel the weight of every millennia of his wars pressing down. This is the moment when the galaxy reduces a life to its function, and I am one among millions. The stench of promethium, the harsh clang of bolters being cleaned, the whispering prayers of Scutarii in the next hall, these are my companions now, the heralds of survival and sacrifice. If you have ever wondered what it is to be drafted, to be plucked from the shivering anonymity of civilian life and thrust into the eternal battlefield of humanity's salvation, then stay with me. Before the universe swallows this tale whole, take a moment to anchor yourself in this narrative. Like, share, and subscribe so that these stories, dark, visceral, unflinching, reach those who crave the truth of the Imperium, not the sanitized echoes of idle historians. The lives of the drafted are not meant for comfort, but for witness. The first time I heard my name called, it was not in triumph but in the cold metallic whisper of a vox grill. My own heartbeat echoed in my ears, louder than the distant clang of machinery and the muted hum of the manufactorum beyond the barracks walls. I had spent my life in the half-light of ordinary days, unaware that the galaxy had already decided my fate. And now, standing in the shadowed corridor, I felt the first shiver of comprehension. I was no longer an individual. I was property of the Imperium, a vessel to be shaped, consumed, and repurposed in service to the Emperor. The barracks were cavernous, stretching far beyond the perception of any human eye, lined with rows of steel bunks and the scent of promethium so thick it clung to my throat. Servitors moved with mechanical precision, their arms ending in grinding tools and hydraulic claws, tending to the endless maintenance of war material. The floor beneath my boots was worn to a polished gray, the etched imperial Aquila inlaid in sections worn nearly smooth by centuries of footsteps, prayers, and silent despair. I traced it with my eyes, wondering if those who had walked here before me had felt the same pull in their chest, the same hot, creeping dread of becoming just another number in the Emperor's ledger. When the senior adjutant entered, his armor reflected the harsh, flickering light of overhead flares, and for a moment he was a specter rather than a man. His eyes were hidden beneath the bronze visor of the Adeptus Custodes like breastplate, and yet I could feel them drilling into my soul, judging, measuring, deciding whether I had the mettle to endure. "Drafted personnel will assemble immediately," he said, each word a metallic hammer in the hollow of the hall. His voice carried no malice, no mercy, only the inexorable authority of the Imperium, a force that would bend, break, or erase anyone who resisted. I followed the stream of other recruits, bodies hunched under the weight of the unknown, their eyes hollow, their faces pale beneath the thin sheen of sweat. Some murmured prayers to saints long dead, others muttered curses at the machinery around them, as if blaming the cold, unyielding universe for the inevitability of what was to come. Each step toward the central muster hall was a descent into a world where innocence had been outlawed, replaced by discipline, fear, and the whispered promises of survival. The air grew hotter, scented with the metallic tang of blood from previous drills, the bitter odor of disinfectant, and the unrelenting smell of oil and ash. We were corralled into a wide chamber, the walls adorned with data slates displaying endless lists of names, insignia, and muster codes. It was there, in that moment, that I first understood the true weight of being drafted. Not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as flesh to be shaped, molded, and subsumed into the larger machine of the Imperium. Each name on the data slate was a life, a history, a future snatched away by a system that saw only utility. I swallowed hard, tasting the copper tang of fear in my mouth, knowing that soon I would be stripped of everything familiar. my family, my home, my illusions of choice, and handed over to forces that moved with the precision of millennia. A voice crackled through the chamber, mechanical yet distinctly human, calling out protocols, sequences, and the initiation steps that would define the first hours of our training. We moved in response, almost instinctively, as if the universe itself demanded obedience before comprehension could take hold. I felt my muscles tighten, my spine straighten, and my mind shrink into a singular focus. Survive this, and perhaps some fragment of myself might remain. Around me, the others mirrored my motions, a silent acknowledgement that we were all trapped in the same relentless current, and that resistance was meaningless. And yet, amidst the terror and the metallic odor, there was a strange, intoxicating sense of purpose. For the first time, I realized that my life, however small, however fragile, was part of something that stretched across the stars, a vast, unending struggle to keep humanity alive against the darkness that sought to consume it. I did not see the Emperor, and perhaps I never would, but I felt his presence in the whispers of the Scutarii, in the glint of armor, in the ceaseless rhythm of orders and drills. The draft was no ceremony of celebration. It was baptism by fire, a crucible where flesh, faith, and fear intertwined into a single thread that could either break or endure. I braced myself as the first trial began, the walls closing in with the quiet certainty of inevitability. This was the beginning, the summoning of flesh and faith into a galaxy that had no room for hesitation. Every step I took carried the weight of centuries of war, and every breath was a defiance against the machinery that sought to devour individuality. I was no longer merely myself. I was a draft, a fragment of humanity, and the Emperor's will had already claimed me. The first day of training arrived not with fanfare, but with the grinding certainty of inevitability. Dawn in the barracks was measured not by sunlight, for the high windows were long sealed against the endless black of space, but by the flaring of the promethium lamps and the mechanical chime of the muster bells. My body ached from the sudden weight of armor, the straps biting into shoulders that had known only the ease of civilian life. The adjutants did not speak to us as men. They spoke as instruments of the Imperium, their commands precise, unyielding, and devoid of sympathy. A single hesitation drew a sharp crack of the whip from the training sergeants, and the echo rattled in my skull long after the leather snapped against the polished floor. We were taught the first truths of survival immediately. How to march until muscles screamed in protest, how to keep our breathing even under the shadow of exhaustion, how to obey without question. The custodian-like instructors moved among us, their presence both inspiring and terrifying, each step radiating authority that demanded obedience. The smell of sweat, oil, and scorched machinery mixed into a haze that clung to our skin, filling the nostrils, the throat, even the mind. Every inhale reminded me that I was no longer just human. I was a component in the machinery of war, a soldier to be sharpened until the edge was indistinguishable from the blade. It was in the weapons chamber that the reality of the draft struck with brutal clarity. Rows of bolters and lacifers lined the walls, each gleaming under the harsh lights, each a promise of power and destruction. I picked up the weight of a loss gun for the first time, and it felt almost alive, humming faintly in my hands, a tether to the galaxy's blood-soaked will. The instructors watched as we trained, correcting every stance, every angle, every flicker of hesitation. One misstep could mean injury, perhaps death, and yet the true danger was not in the weapons themselves. It was in the realization that they were extensions of the Emperor's demand, that each trigger pulled was a surrender of personal morality in favor of a higher, inescapable duty. Meals, when they came, were taken in silence, as the nutrient paste slid across our tongues, flavorless but sufficient. Conversation was discouraged, eyes were to remain downcast, and minds were to remain obedient. Yet even in that austere regimen, the whispers began. Rumors of those who had trained before us, of young recruits lost to the first trials, of skirmishes beyond the sector where only echoes returned to tell the tale. Some spoke in hushed tones of the Astronomicon, of the light that guided fleets across the void, and of the Golden Throne, whose indomitable will sustained all of humanity. None of it could be verified, yet the stories clung to us like smoke, feeding both fear and awe. Even in doubt, even in terror, we felt the pulse of something vast and incomprehensible, a current far stronger than our fragile lives. I watched a boy from the outer hive stumble in formation, his foot catching the edge of the polished floor. The instructor's gauntlet hand struck down without hesitation, and the boy did not rise for a long moment, staring at us with eyes that reflected a mixture of pain and awakening. It was a lesson we all understood immediately. Weakness was not merely punished, it was erased, leaving no trace but the echo of a cautionary tale. Each day, each moment of hesitation, each breath taken without purpose became an opportunity to be consumed by the system, and yet the act of survival, however small, however grim, felt like a defiance in itself. By the time evening descended, marked not by sun but by the dimming of the lamps and the mechanical lowering of servitors into the corridors, exhaustion had become an intimate companion. I lay on the cold metal of the bunk, listening to the hiss of hydraulics and the faint, haunting chorus of prayers from adjacent chambers. The words were fragmented, sometimes incoherent, yet their cadence held a strange comfort, as if the universe acknowledged our suffering and blessed it in some unknowable way. My mind wandered to home, to faces that had once smiled at me without knowledge of the horrors awaiting beyond the barracks walls. That world felt impossibly distant, almost fictional, as if it had never existed at all. And then came the night trials, when darkness was absolute, when only the faint red glow of emergency lamps punctuated the blackness. The instructors moved silently among us, testing our reflexes, our awareness, our willingness to obey without sight. Fear became a tangible weight pressing into our chests, and yet in that fear, there was clarity. Life was not simply to be survived. It was to be mastered, calibrated, and offered in service. I clenched my fists, tasting the metal tang of sweat and fear, and understood for the first time what it truly meant to be drafted. Not to fight, not merely to endure, but to surrender fully while retaining the fragile ember of self enough to navigate the unforgiving tides of war. As sleep claimed me, fitful and brief, I could not escape the awareness that this was only the beginning. The draft had claimed us, body and soul, but the true trials were still ahead, waiting beyond the walls of the barracks, in the firing ranges, the drill halls, and the unknown battlefields that stretched across star systems. The Emperor's gaze was unseen, but omnipresent, and in the shadow of that gaze, every heartbeat became a prayer, every breath a defiance, every step a question of whether flesh could endure faith, or faith could endure flesh. Morning came again, though it felt less like a beginning and more like the continuation of a sentence already written in pain and obedience. The lamps flickered over ranks of newly forged recruits, eyes still heavy with the residue of restless sleep, faces drawn tight with tension. Today, the training intensified. We were herded into the corridors for endurance drills, our legs burning with the promise of exhaustion, our lungs tight with the acrid scent of the manufactorum's ever-present smoke. Every step echoed across the polished floors, a metronome of submission to the rhythm of the Imperium. There was no music here, only the metallic harmony of discipline and the whispered cadence of survival. The instructors moved among us with almost predatory grace, gauntlets clanking with each step, eyes hidden behind polished visors that reflected nothing but the cold light of duty. One misstep, one stutter of hesitation, and the lash of reprimand struck not merely the body but the spirit. I felt the sting as a warning to my neighbors, a reminder that failure was contagious, and that weakness would spread unless it was crushed immediately. The boy who had stumbled yesterday moved now with a rigid focus, his gaze lowered, his every movement measured. I watched him, recognizing in his struggle the reflection of my own fear, my own determination to survive. Later, we were introduced to the Vox grills, instruments of communication and surveillance that would link us to the wider machinery of the Imperium. Each recruit was instructed in their operation, learning how to transmit reports, receive orders, and relay data with unerring accuracy. It was a lesson in obedience, but also a lesson in trust. Trust not in ourselves, but in the relentless network that bound humanity across the stars. The crackle of static, the faint hum of far-off machinery, even the clipped voices from distant sectors carried a weight I could not have imagined before the draft. We were small components in a system too vast to comprehend, yet each action, each word, could ripple outward, shaping the tide of countless unseen battles. Meals remained austere, taken in silence while overseers moved among us like shadows, scanning for weakness. The nutrient paste was tasteless, but it fueled the body and reminded the mind that comfort was irrelevant. Only survival and adaptation mattered. Whispers persisted, stories of warriors who had walked these halls before us, some never to return, others to ascend into the mythic ranks of the Adeptus Custodes or Scitarii. I clung to these stories not as certainty, but as guidance, fragments of possibility that suggested even within the crushing weight of the draft, a spark of purpose could persist. By midday, we were taken to the combat simulators, vast chambers where projections of battlefield scenarios flickered against walls that seemed impossibly high. The simulations were cruelly realistic, testing reflexes, strategy, and the capacity for fear. I felt my muscles tighten as I navigated virtual corridors filled with enemies both human and Xenos, bolter fire echoing in my ears, lost gun beams cutting through the darkness. The line between simulation and reality blurred. I could taste the iron of fear on my tongue and smell the smoke and ash of distant worlds. Each success was met with mechanical approval. Each failure, a reminder of fragility and mortality. As the day faded into night, exhaustion settled into my bones, but the real trial awaited, reflection. In the silence of the barracks, with the hum of servitors maintaining the endless machinery around us, I understood that being drafted was more than training or combat. It was a confrontation with the self, a reckoning with the fragility of life and the immensity of duty. I traced my fingers over the worn Aquila in the floor, seeking some anchor in a world that had been stripped of comfort, of familiarity, of choice. I realized that to endure, I must not only obey the commands of the instructors, the imperatives of the Imperium, but also forge within myself a resilience that the draft could never entirely consume. In that quiet hour, I felt the strange duality of my new existence. Fear and awe, pain and purpose, obedience and defiance. The draft had claimed me, yes, but in its claim, it had also forced me to confront the vastness of my insignificance and the extraordinary potential within it. Tomorrow would bring new trials, harsher lessons, and further stripping away of what I once was. But tonight, the ember of survival burned, fragile yet unbroken, a light that even the vast darkness of the Imperium could not fully extinguish. And as sleep finally claimed me, uneasy and fitful, I knew with certainty that the draft was only the beginning. The galaxy awaited beyond the barracks walls, indifferent, immense, and eternal, and I would soon learn what it truly meant to carry flesh and faith into the endless fires of war. The next days blurred into a relentless sequence of motion, heat, and expectation. The barracks, once intimidating in their cavernous emptiness, became a theater of constant appraisal. Every nerve, every muscle, every thought was examined, measured, and pressed into service. The instructors moved like shadows with the weight of centuries behind them, their gauntlet hands correcting mistakes with the precision of a machine and the instinct of predators. Bolts of pain, discipline, and instruction struck without pause, forming a rhythm that drilled into our bodies and minds alike. This was no mere training. It was a transformation, an unyielding crucible designed to strip humanity to its essence and rebuild it into a weapon. The stench of Promethium was a constant companion, mingling with the sweat of uncountable recruits pressed into formation. The scent clung to clothing, hair, and skin, an unrelenting reminder that we were no longer civilians but components in the Imperium's endless machinery. The clang of bolters being assembled, the hiss of hydraulics, the soft, eerie murmur of servo harnesses moving in corridors overhead, All formed a symphony that spoke of inevitability, duty, and the vast machinery of war that stretched across star systems. Every inhale, every footfall, every motion became a testament to endurance, to the cruel calculus that survival demanded. The physical trials were merciless. Hours of running through obstacle courses designed to break the body into pliancy, to test the mettle of muscle and sinew, alternated with the cold, precise repetition of weapons drills. Loss guns, bolters, and training rifles felt almost sentient in our hands, humming with lethal promise, a constant reminder that mastery over them was not only a requirement but a necessity. One moment of hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty, and the instructor's gauntlet hand descended with silent authority. Pain became not punishment but instruction, an unspoken language we were forced to learn. Even as the body was pressed to its limits, the mind was not spared. We were immersed in endless indoctrination. Prayers, litanies, and fragmented histories of the Emperor and the Imperium, repeated until the words became part of us, inscribed into the marrow of our bones. The truth of the galaxy, the ceaseless war against Xenos, heretics, and traitors, was hammered into every thought. Doubt was a luxury none could afford. Hesitation was a flaw to be eradicated. And yet, beneath the weight of doctrine and discipline, tiny sparks of defiance flickered within those of us who remembered what it was to breathe freely, to think independently, to exist without constant oversight. The first combat simulation shattered any remaining illusions. In a massive chamber filled with hololithic projections, we were plunged into scenarios designed to replicate the chaos of battle across multiple planetary surfaces. The simulated enemies, orcs, heretical cults, even glimpses of Necron constructs, moved with terrifying unpredictability, forcing recruits to adapt, to act, to survive. Each action, each misstep, each hesitation carried immediate consequences, recorded and analyzed by the instructors with a cold, mechanical efficiency. I could taste the iron of fear in my mouth, feel the rush of adrenaline sharpening my senses, and sense a subtle transformation within myself. The draft was no longer simply training. It was shaping me into something other than I had been, forging a tool out of flesh, bone, and will. Meals and rest were brief, functional, and stripped of comfort. The nutrient paste, the recycled air, the metallic taste of water, all reinforced a singular lesson. Comfort is unnecessary, survival is everything. Between drills, some recruits murmured about the legends of those who had endured before us, whispers of Adeptus Custodes visiting distant battlefronts, of Skitarii warriors whose flesh had been reshaped into perfection, of heroes who had glimpsed the Astronomican's light and returned. The stories were half-truths, half-prayers, yet they inspired both dread and determination. We realized that survival was not only about strength, skill, or obedience, it was about endurance of spirit, the fragile ember of self that could survive even the most merciless trials. Evening brought little relief. Darkness within the barracks was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of emergency lamps. The instructors moved silently through the shadows, testing our vigilance and endurance, measuring the subtle rise and fall of our chests, listening to the rhythm of our thoughts as we lay exhausted on the cold metal bunks. I felt my body simultaneously collapsing and sharpening, my mind both fraying and consolidating. Fear had become a constant companion, but so had resolve. I understood, with a chilling clarity, that the draft demanded more than obedience, it demanded metamorphosis. Flesh would be broken, will would be tested, and only through the crucible of promethium, blood, and fire could any of us hope to emerge intact. The days lengthened into weeks, though the distinction between one and the next blurred beneath the unyielding rhythm of the draft. Every moment was structured, regimented, assessed, catalogued, and measured against some imperceptible standard of adequacy. The instructors moved among us with the effortless authority of predators, their presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying, their every gesture a silent reminder of what awaited those who faltered. Pain had become a companion, discipline a language, and endurance a constant, oppressive weight pressing into the chest of each recruit. Combat drills intensified beyond anything I had imagined possible. Loss guns, now second nature in our grasp, were wielded with precision, aimed at targets that flickered and shifted as if mocking us. The sound of simulated bolter fire cracked like thunder in the chamber, echoing through the steel walls, reverberating through bone and muscle alike. We learned to move in unison, to anticipate one another, to react with preternatural speed. One misstep could cost a fellow recruit their life in the simulations, and though the danger was illusory, the psychological imprint was indelible. I could feel my reflexes sharpening, my mind narrowing, my senses attuning to every microsecond of action. In the crucible of these trials, fear became a tool rather than an impediment, and hesitation a liability I could no longer afford. The indoctrination persisted alongside the physical rigor. Litanies of faith and loyalty were woven seamlessly into the drills, reinforcing the unbreakable bond between flesh and purpose. Each morning, as the promethium lamps flickered to life, we recited the words of prayer while performing our exercises, blending devotion with exertion until the two became inseparable. I could feel the rhythm of the chants in my chest, a strange symphony of fear, awe, and determination that seemed to merge the human and the divine into a single, unshakable focus. Stories of the Emperor's triumphs, of the valor of those who had walked the path before us, and of the vast armies of the Imperium became more than tales. They became rules, imperatives, and warnings etched into the marrow of our bones. We were not permitted the luxury of thought beyond survival. Sleep was rationed, rest was functional, and every breath was accounted for. Yet in the rare, fleeting moments between drills, I could observe the transformation occurring in myself and the others. The boy who had stumbled on our first day now moved with careful grace, his eyes sharp, body taut, every motion deliberate. Even those who once murmured prayers of despair now carried themselves with a semblance of confidence, their fear tempered by the relentless fire of repetition and discipline. Survival, I realized, was not merely about strength or obedience. It was about the alchemy of endurance, courage, and focus, the forging of a human instrument honed to perfection. The first live-fire exercises brought the starkest lessons yet. In a sealed chamber designed to replicate the chaos of war, we were exposed to the unfiltered sensory assault of combat. Bolter rounds ricocheted, loss fire lanced through simulated smoke, and the acrid tang of burnt promethium filled the air. Screams, whether real or simulated, echoed with horrifying clarity, embedding themselves in memory as warnings. Each recruit was forced to navigate the conflagration, to identify friend from foe, to obey orders while improvising within the chaos. My own hands shook as I gripped the bolter, but I learned to temper the tremor with focus, to channel the fear into precision, to allow adrenaline to guide rather than betray me. Evenings in the barracks were no relief. Exhaustion had seeped into the muscles, into the mind, into the very marrow of our bones. The metallic scent of the halls, mingled with sweat, oil, and lingering promethium, clung to our skin like a shroud. Yet in that oppressive quiet, I began to feel the strange, unspoken camaraderie that bound us together. Eyes met briefly in acknowledgement of shared suffering. Slight nods conveyed understanding and silent support. We were still individuals, yet the draft was shaping us into a collective force, a human extension of the Imperium's will, where each step forward relied upon the precision, endurance, and vigilance of the others. By the time sleep claimed us, even in its fractured, shallow form, I knew that the true measure of the draft was not in the drills, nor in the physical pain, nor even in the indoctrination. It was in the gradual, unrelenting transformation of spirit, the forging of human flesh and mind into an instrument capable of surviving, adapting, and functioning in a galaxy where weakness was immediately exploited and often fatal. The lessons of promethium, of pain, of discipline, of obedience and focus were etched into every sinew, every thought, every heartbeat. I was changing, irrevocably. And the galaxy beyond the barracks awaited, indifferent, relentless, and infinitely dangerous, ready to test the limits of what a drafted recruit could endure. The culmination of weeks in the crucible of the draft arrived not with fanfare, but with an escalation so brutal that it left no room for doubt. We were to face the field trials. The instructors, moving like silent predators in their polished armor, herded us into the deployment bays, where the air was thick with heat, promethium, and the faint metallic tang of old blood. The vast chamber stretched in every direction, its walls lined with observation ports through which the veterans of previous campaigns watched, impassive, recording every twitch, every hesitation. The simulation of combat here was indistinguishable from reality. Smoke choked the edges of vision, distant explosions shook the floor, and the echo of bolter fire resounded through every corridor, rattling the chest and rattling the mind. The first scenario was deceptively simple. Advance through a narrow corridor while under fire, neutralizing targets with the precision drilled into us for weeks. Yet simplicity is a lie in the universe of the Imperium. The targets shifted, ambushed positions flared into existence, and the environment itself seemed to conspire against us. Fear surged, a living entity in my chest, yet I felt a curious clarity in its grip. Every instruction, every repetition, every lesson from the past weeks crystallized into instinct. I moved, aimed, fired, and advanced, my body and mind welded to a singular purpose. Around me, the others moved with similar intensity, some faltering, others excelling, each step a test of resilience, each breath a gamble against the relentless rhythm of the trial. Pain became almost poetic. The sting of lost gun discharge, the ache in overworked muscles, the burn of sweat and promethium smoke filling the lungs, all fused into a sensory tapestry that defined the very essence of being drafted. It was no longer enough to survive. Survival demanded mastery over fear, over hesitation, over the instinct for self-preservation in its rawest, most primitive form. I understood then that the draft was more than training. It was transformation, shaping us into conduits of the Imperium's will, instruments of war sharpened by fire, sweat, and blood. After the trials, we were herded into the recovery chambers, where the heat and the smell of industry lingered even in the hollow silence. Servitors attended to injuries, both minor and severe, moving with mechanical precision. We were stripped of comfort, of empathy, of leisure. Even the water we drank was measured and rationed, filtered through systems designed to ensure nothing wasted, nothing unnecessary. And yet, within this strict regime, I could feel the subtle pulse of pride, the quiet affirmation that we were changing. Our bodies were stronger, our minds sharper, our reflexes honed to respond to danger without thought. The draft demanded obedience, yes, but it also demanded adaptation, and we were learning to survive in ways we had never imagined. Night brought little relief. Exhaustion was a cloak, heavy and unyielding, but sleep was shallow, punctuated by the hum of machinery and the distant, echoing prayers of recruits in adjacent chambers. The whispers persisted, stories of custodes, scutarii, and warriors who had walked these halls before us and ascended to mythic heights. Whether true or merely legend, the tales reinforced a fragile hope. Survival was possible, and within that survival lay the seed of greatness. It was an ember against the cold, mechanical certainty of the draft, a reminder that even in a galaxy governed by war and unfeeling authority, humanity's spark could endure. By the third week, I could feel the fusion of fear, discipline, and determination within me. Every movement, every glance, every thought had been tempered in the crucible of promethium and blood. I was no longer simply a recruit. I was a part of the machinery of the Imperium, yet still a distinct entity capable of choice within the boundaries dictated by necessity and duty. I had learned to obey without hesitation, to act without question, to endure without complaint. And yet, beneath it all, a quiet defiance persisted. a fragment of self that refused to be entirely subsumed, a tiny ember of identity amidst the relentless forge of the draft. The transformation was not complete, nor would it ever be entirely. But as I lay on the metal bunk, exhausted, breathing the acrid air, feeling every ache and every pulse of life, I understood the truth of the draft. It was not merely about strength, obedience, or survival. It was about becoming something larger than oneself, something capable of enduring the unending war that defined humanity's existence in the stars. And when the alarm sounded once more, calling us into yet another trial, I rose without hesitation, knowing that the galaxy awaited beyond the barracks, immense, indifferent, and merciless. I was ready, or as ready as any flesh could ever be to serve the will of the Imperium. The first deployment beyond the barracks carried a weight that was different from anything we had yet experienced. The exercises, simulations, and drills had shaped our bodies and minds, but now the galaxy itself loomed, cold, vast, and indifferent. We were ferried aboard a transport, its hull vibrating with the low hum of fusion engines, promethium fumes mingling with the recycled air of the interior. Outside, the void stretched infinite and silent, dotted with the glint of distant stars and the pale light of far-off worlds. No walls contained us here, no instructors could immediately correct our failures, and the unknown waited beyond the armored doors. For the first time, the draft was not just a crucible, it was an awakening. The transport shuddered as it entered orbit around a forge world, a planet scarred by centuries of industry and war. Smoke pillars rose from endless manufactorums, casting a sickly orange haze across cities that sprawled like labyrinthine scars upon the surface. We disembarked into a landscape both alien and familiar, the smell of molten metal, the heat of promethium fires, and the distant roar of servitors moving through streets built for machinery rather than men. Even in this brief exposure, the reality of the Imperium scale was overwhelming. The battles we would fight were not merely physical confrontations but contests against an entire civilization's machinery, vast beyond comprehension, with death as a constant companion. The first skirmish exercises on this world were unlike anything in the barracks. Ruined buildings offered precarious cover, smoke-filled corridors concealed dangers, and the echo of bolter fire ricocheting against steel and stone created a constant, deafening presence. The instructors remained at a distance now, observing rather than correcting, allowing the chaos to test us fully. I could feel my body responding automatically, reflexes honed by weeks of relentless training, eyes scanning for threats, every muscle poised for action. Yet even in this conditioned state, fear remained, whispering in the corners of the mind that any misstep could be fatal, that every decision carried consequence beyond mere failure. It could be annihilation. It was in these moments, amidst the heat, smoke, and chaos, that I began to perceive the shadows of rumor and legend entwined with reality. Whispers reached us from the older recruits, tales of the Astronomicon, glowing faintly across the void, guiding fleets and offering solace to those who served, stories of the Golden Throne, whose immovable will sustained humanity and whose secrets were beyond comprehension. Rumors of custodes appearing silently in times of great peril, their presence as much divine as martial. None of it could be confirmed, and yet the possibility haunted every step, pressing on the mind as palpably as the weight of our armor. Belief became both weapon and shield, a fragile tether to something larger than the battlefield itself. We moved through ruins where the air shimmered with heat and dust, encountering holographic projections of Xeno's threats, insurgents, and remnants of heretical cults. Each encounter demanded more than reflex. It required judgment, an instinct honed by observation and trial, a delicate balance between obedience and improvisation. I saw recruits falter, some overcome by the overwhelming stimuli, others rise with a terrifying efficiency that bordered on inhuman. I realized that the draft was no longer simply about molding flesh, it was about shaping perception, forging minds capable of navigating the complexity of war on a scale that dwarfed individual ambition or comprehension. Nightfall on the Forge world brought a different kind of trial. Darkness was absolute, pierced only by the fires of industrial complexes and the faint glow of distant starports. The temperature dropped, yet the air remained thick with smoke, dust, and the faint tang of chemical runoff. Silence fell over the deployment site, but it was a fragile, tense quiet, punctuated by the distant clang of machinery and the occasional cry of an unseen predator. In that silence, the mind had space to wander, to reflect on the enormity of the universe, and on the role that a single draft, myself among millions, played within it. We were fragments of humanity, cast into the impossible void, carrying flesh and faith as instruments of survival and devotion. I lay in the ruins that night, exhausted, limbs aching, mind taut with vigilance. I traced my gaze upward through the lattice of smoke and fire, imagining the light of the Astronomicon somewhere beyond the stars, imagining the Emperor's silent vigil over countless worlds. Rumors, half-truths, prayers, these were the threads that held us together in the darkness, and I clung to them like a lifeline. The draft had pushed me to the edge of endurance, had stripped away illusions and comfort, and had forged me into something unfamiliar yet necessary. Beyond the immediate trials of survival lay the endless galaxy, indifferent, perilous, and awe-inspiring. And in the shadow of that immensity, I understood that the true trial was only beginning. The navigation of existence itself under the gaze of the Emperor and the weight of humanity's fragile continuity. The following days were spent in constant motion, the Forge world testing every skill we had acquired, stripping away remnants of hesitation and doubt. Missions became longer, exercises more complex, and the stakes always sharper. Every skirmish, every patrol through the ruined urban landscapes and molten industrial complexes, demanded a synthesis of body, mind, and instinct. There was no room for indecision. Every decision, every twitch of a finger, every adjustment in stance carried consequences, immediate or delayed. The galaxy was not patient, and neither was the Emperor. In the chaos of these missions, the whispers of myth and rumor became ever more potent. Older recruits spoke of custodes moving unseen through battlefields, of Scutarii performing tasks with mechanical precision that bordered on the divine, and of the Astronomicon's glow flickering faintly, imperceptible yet guiding those who knew how to read it. I did not know what was true. Perhaps none of it was. And yet, even doubt had its place, for in it lay caution, humility, and a recognition of the scale of the universe we had entered. Survival now required not only skill and strength, but a willingness to acknowledge forces beyond comprehension and act within their shadow. We were forced into scenarios where physical endurance alone would not suffice. Patrolling devastated city streets under intermittent fire, improvising strategy in the face of simulated orc warbands, reacting to sudden environmental hazards like collapsing buildings or Prometheum fires, and coordinating with recruits whose nerves were fraying under relentless pressure. Each action was a lesson in the delicate balance of cooperation, adaptability, and obedience. I felt my perception sharpening, every sound amplified, every movement of dust, smoke, or shadow scrutinized for danger. Fear became a tool, honed by repetition, guiding rather than overwhelming the body. Pain was constant, yet no longer purely oppressive. It became a measure of what could be endured, a signal of growth rather than surrender. Meals and rest were scarce, taken amid the hum of machinery and the pervasive smell of ash and oil. Yet, even in these austere moments, the enormity of our surroundings could not be ignored. The Forge world's endless smoke columns rose like monuments to human industry and struggle, while the skies, dotted with distant fleets, hinted at the galaxy's vast scale and unyielding complexity. I glimpsed the immensity of the Imperium, the countless lives and machines moving in orchestrated chaos across systems, and felt both insignificance and pride. Insignificance for the immensity of the cosmos, pride for being forged to serve a purpose within it. Rumor and faith intertwined in strange ways during these nights. Some spoke quietly of the Emperor himself, seated upon the golden throne, his will sustaining humanity across countless worlds. Others whispered of the Astronomicon, the faint light that guided fleets across impossibly distant stars, or of Custodes silently enforcing his will where mortal eyes could not perceive. I neither confirmed nor denied these stories, but their presence shaped my understanding of duty. The draft had taught me obedience, endurance, and skill, but it was faith, fragile, uncertain, and unproven, that guided action when the immediate senses failed. The galaxy, vast and indifferent, was tempered by rumor and devotion, and survival demanded mastery over both tangible and intangible forces. Each trial, each mission, further stripped away the civilian remnants of self. I moved with purpose now, not merely reacting but anticipating, balancing instinct with learned precision. My muscles remembered drills, my mind calculated probabilities, and my faith, such as it was, wove a tenuous thread between fear and action. Even as exhaustion pressed into every joint, I could feel the quiet assertion of identity, the ember of human will surviving amidst the unyielding machinery of war. To endure the draft was to accept transformation, yet to endure the galaxy was to retain the spark of self against a universe that sought only function, not individuality. Night fell again, colder now, the distant glow of Prometheum furnaces casting long, wavering shadows across the ruined streets. I stood atop a ridge overlooking the settlement, listening to the hum of distant servitors and the faint echo of drills far below. The universe stretched beyond comprehension, filled with light and shadow, rumor and reality, threat and purpose. Somewhere out there, the Emperor's gaze, or the perception of it, pressed down upon us, guiding, judging, indifferent yet demanding. And within that shadow, I felt both my fragility and my potential. The draft had forged my body in promethium and blood, my mind in discipline and fear. But only here, at the edge of the galaxy, did I sense the enormity of the path ahead, the impossible scale of the wars yet to come, and the fragile, persistent ember of self that must endure if humanity was to survive at all. Dawn on the Forge world came not with sunlight but with the harsh glow of industrial flares cutting through the smog-choked skies. The city sprawled endlessly beneath us, streets etched with the scars of centuries of war and industry, punctuated by the skeletal remains of once proud manufactorums. We moved through the streets, not as civilians or observers, but as instruments of the Imperium's will, every motion precise, every thought disciplined, every breath measured. The weight of armor and the hum of lost guns were constant reminders that we were no longer simply ourselves. We were drafted, forged, and now tested in the crucible of reality. The field exercises escalated to engagements that blurred the line between training and war. Orc projections surged from smoke-filled alleyways, Xenos traps lurked beneath collapsed walkways, and heretical holograms struck with sudden ferocity. Coordination became a matter of survival, hesitation a death sentence. I moved with instinct sharpened by weeks of relentless drills, bolter in hand, senses stretched to their limits. Each shot fired, each command relayed, each tactical choice executed was a thread in the fabric of survival. And yet, in the chaos, a subtle awareness grew. The draft had not only forged my body but had awakened an understanding of fear, focus, and purpose interwoven. Pain, danger, and uncertainty were no longer enemies. They were guides, teaching me how to endure. Amidst the smoke and fire, rumor persisted like a faint heartbeat behind the din of reality. Whispers of custodes moving unseen across battlefields, of Scutarii performing tasks with precise efficiency, and of the Astronomicon's glow providing guidance to those attuned to its light floated in the periphery of thought. These tales were fragments, unverified, yet they shaped decisions. Faith, uncertainty, and observation became inseparable tools. One had to act with skill while acknowledging the unseen forces that governed the galaxy. To survive was not simply to react, but to anticipate both tangible and intangible currents of influence, to navigate the world as both instrument and human, obedience tempered by perception. Night exercises demanded endurance beyond the physical. Darkness was absolute, punctuated only by the flicker of distant industrial flames and emergency lamps. We moved through ruined corridors and shattered plazas, eyes straining, reflexes sharpened, nerves taut. Every sound, a distant clang, a shifting shadow, became a signal, every whisper of movement a threat. Yet, in that tension there was clarity. The galaxy was indifferent, vast, and often incomprehensible, but within its indifference existed patterns, opportunities, and the faintest threads of hope. Survival required attention, skill, courage, and a tenuous trust in both the material and the metaphysical. I paused atop a collapsed ridge to observe the sprawling city below. The night air carried the tang of molten metal, ash, and smoke, scents that clung to the skin and filled the lungs with a reminder of both life and mortality. Somewhere far above, the Astronomican's glow might pierce the void, guiding fleets and souls alike. Somewhere below, the fires of industry and war would continue unabated. And somewhere in the shadow of the Emperor's throne, perhaps, the Imperiums will silently judged, watched, and sustained a galaxy too vast for comprehension. In that silence, I felt the enormity of the journey ahead. Endless campaigns, infinite challenges, and the ceaseless demand that flesh, mind, and faith endure where all else might fail. By the final hours of our deployment, exhaustion and clarity fused into a singular state of being. The draft had achieved its ultimate purpose. We were no longer mere recruits. We were instruments forged in Prometheum, honed in blood, tempered by discipline, and awakened to the scale of the galaxy. Fear and faith, pain and resilience, obedience and instinct, all existed in delicate balance. I could feel the ember of self within me, fragile yet persistent, navigating the unyielding demands of duty and the endless shadow of the Emperor. As the transport prepared to carry us back to the barracks, I gazed at the vast, star-filled expanse of the void. The galaxy stretched infinitely in every direction, indifferent, awe-inspiring, and merciless. The draft had claimed us, reshaped us, and prepared us for a reality far beyond the training halls. And yet, beneath all the drills, simulations, and tests, I understood a truth that no exercise could convey fully. Survival was never merely physical, obedience never merely mechanical, and faith never merely ritual. The galaxy demanded adaptation, endurance, and the quiet courage to maintain selfhood amidst the machinery of the Imperium. In that realization, I felt both insignificance and purpose, a paradox as vast as the stars themselves, and as enduring as the shadow of the Emperor who watched silently from Terra.